Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
And I'm their guest and friend, Alan Singer. Thank you for having me again.
Dr. Alan Singer, educator, historian, expert that we call on most of the time. Happy to have him with us. We're doing a Wednesday session with Zoom, brought to you by EVT Educational Productions, and it will pop up on Manhattan Neighborhood Network some Mondays sometime in end of August, early September. We'll keep our fingers crossed. But thanks for joining us, folks. And we're going to jump off because we call Media Watch. Big media story, as far as we're concerned, was a police raid somewhere in Kansas that Bob's going to tell us about. Total disregard for the First Amendment. Bob, update us on Marion, Kansas.
This story blew us all away when it broke because it's so egregious and so ridiculous. I had to do a triple take when I first saw the story. But basically, it's an issue with a paper called the Marion County Record, close to Kansas City, I believe. And it's a small town run by an editor who actually was a colleague of mine out in Milwaukee. He was working at the Milwaukee Journal when I was at the Milwaukee Sentinel in the 90s. In any case, there was an issue with the way the newspaper got a report of a drunk driving record for a local business owner who apparently was suspected of driving after she no longer had a license. So there was a question as to how the newspaper got that record. She complained to the police, and the police figured that the only way that they could investigate it was to go down to the newsroom, seize every computer in the newsroom, snatch phones out of the hands of local reporters, and then search the homes of the 98-year-old co-owner of the paper and another person, I believe, in the city to take electronics and other evidence from them. This action attempts to blow the First Amendment out of the water. I mean, there was so many other remedies the police could have used rather than seizing everything, starting with interviewing the people who you're wondering how they got the information.
The power of subpoena, right, Bob?
Yes.
Get a subpoena. You get through the courts what you need, and they totally disregarded that.
Yes, they went straight to grab and go. They went straight to, let's go into the newsroom, take what we need, including, like I said, the phones out of the hands of the reporters, right out of their hands, and they took everything. So this blew up, of course, in social media, and especially among professional journalism organizations, including the Society of Professional Journalists, of which I used to be the president of the New York chapter in the 90s.
What country did this happen in?
Ours. Amazing, isn't it, Alan? I mean, it's stunning. So the SPJ promised to support up to $20,000 of their legal costs, but I have an update as of 1 hour ago today. Today, the Marion County prosecutor reversed what happened. And the phones, the computers, and whatever evidence was seized is going back. And I just want to read a very brief quote, since we have so many other issues to talk about today, from the Marion County prosecutor as he reversed what happened. A guy named, Marion County, I'll pull up the name in a second, but the Marion County prosecutor said, upon further review, however, I have come to the conclusion that insufficient evidence exists to establish a legally sufficient nexus between this alleged crime, the places searched, and the items seized. So with that, the prosecutor, Joel Enzi of Marion County, is returning all of the Marion County records equipment, and and we don't know at this point whether any information was copied, deleted, or otherwise made use of while in the possession of the police. So that's an issue that still has to be litigated. And there are lots of journalists, including myself, who will be supporting them in their efforts.
Here is the worst part of this entire fiasco. His 98-year-old mother died. And the coroner, according to his interview with PBS, which I saw, has attributed a causative factor to her passing to the stress she was put under as a result of that raid.
Yes.
So he basically hasn't even had time to grieve the passing of his mother while he's fighting to get his equipment back to put out his newspaper. But I just feel we have a litigious society, but he needs to be filing suit against that police department for contributing to the death of his mother. That is my editorial comment on that story. Okay.
Right.
but,
that's a possibly solid civil suit.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. I think that was horrendous. And as a longtime journalist, they say once you're a journalist, you're always a journalist. I think that's as a longtime journalist, that was the worst thing I've seen to come down the pike about the First Amendment and a free press to ever cross my desk in this country. But when you have an autocratic wannabe trying to foment a coup, this is our segue.
Yes.
Why should I be surprised that people are taking a page out of his book and doing all kinds of raids, seizing machines? We'll get to one of the 4 parts of that indictment. But the segue is the story that's on everybody's lips and in everybody's paper and on everybody's TV screen right now, of course, is the 4th indictment that came down, handed up, however they use that phrase in legalese, handed up, handed down, whatever, in Fulton County, Georgia. The grand jury came in with a 98-page indictment that, Alan, you're going to break down for us, right? Against who? Who did they bring in the indictment against? And
I think
18
it was
others?
Mr. Trump.
Donald J. T. Rump.
He is now being prosecuted in 4 different localities.
Huh?
In New York State, he's being prosecuted for paying hush money to a
Porn star.
porn star.
Mhm.
In Florida, he's being prosecuted for refusing to turn over documents that were illegally taken from the White House when he left office, because I guess he figured he was coming back. In Washington, D.C., he's being prosecuted for election interference. But the big one is now came out in the state of Georgia. So this is Wednesday, August 16th. At about midnight on Monday, August 14th, just before the clock struck, turning the Trump into a pumpkin.
Cinderella slipper.
Yeah. For our literary friends,
Yeah.
Georgia, Fulton County prosecutor Fannie Willis released a 98-page indictment, 13 charges against former President Trump. 19 people were indicted, Donald Trump and his co-conspirators. And this is the most serious of the 4 cases. One, because it's a state court, even if a Republican gets elected president, they cannot pardon any of these people. But the other thing is, they have incredible amounts of evidence. This is what Donald Trump talks about, the perfect phone call, which we know was not perfect. And what happens is they systematically made efforts to overthrow the election, to commit fraud against the people of the United States, against the government of the United States, against the people of Georgia, against the government of Georgia. But what the most interesting piece, because it's really a brilliant move by Fannie Willis, the prosecutor, is not only are these 19 people being brought up on individual charges, they're also being prosecuted under the RICO statute.
Mhm.
Now, the RICO statute was originally developed as a way to combat organized crime. So it's called the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organization Acts.
Mhm.
But what they're saying is that these 19 people were involved in a conspiracy to commit all these illegal things.
Mhm.
Now, one of the ironic parts of the RICO charge is that in the 1980s, Rudy Giuliani, who's now known as Rico Giuliani, pioneered the use of these RICO charges against mobsters in New York City.
Mhm.
But he and Donnie, the defendant, are now facing those charges. Now, the prosecutor had also used these charges in other cases. Very, very experienced, very, very systematic. Donnie, the defendant, is in deep trouble.
Okay.
Now,
So,
I just want to, I mean, just, sorry, Eric, go ahead.
no, you go. You go.
Yeah, in using the RICO, in prosecuting this as a RICO charges, you actually have to construct a thread between the 19, connecting them to each other to show that there is collusion, conspiracy, etc. That's what took the 2 years to get this to this point. I mean, that's my take on it, because people were wondering when this thing would percolate and become something. But that's the way I'm understanding it. Not just the individual charges, but you have to prove the conspiracy. And I don't believe Fannie Willis would have thrown in the RICO charges if she didn't have sufficient threads to connect the people together.
Glad you raised that, Bob, because it was interesting watching the media coverage of the indictment and her press conference when she came up to do the press conference after the indictment was handed up. And she took a few questions, and one reporter made note of the fact that the longest answer she gave was when a reporter said, your number one defendant in this case has accused you of being a witch hunt, and this is politically motivated, and blah, blah, blah. And I watched that whole press conference, and the reporter from whichever outlet, whether it was CBS, MSNBC, don't quite remember, when she was doing a report, she said the longest answer in that press conference was a response to that question. And she proceeded to outline the fact that we have done 11 RICO cases under my jurisdiction. And I'm paraphrasing, we do the investigation, we gather the evidence, we follow where the evidence leads us, and wherever the evidence leads us, that's where we go. Once we get there, we assemble the evidence, we file the charges, we present it, and whatever comes out is what comes out. End of question, end of answer. It was her longest answer, and she said, that's where the evidence led, that's where we went, that's why we're here right now. I said, this woman is no nonsense, she takes no prisoners, and guess what? She won those other 11 RICO, those other 10 RICOs. So this number 11 doesn't bode well for these 19 people. So Alan, you were going to break down the counts, the separate sections. So let's try to do that so we don't use up the entire show on this.
Well, basically, amongst the 19, there were 3 different groups.
Mhm.
So we have the legal team. I think they're going to all lose their licenses and probably their degrees. The legal team, which worked closely with Donnie, the defendant, they came up with these absurd ideas that they could somehow block the election of Joseph Biden. And that included pressuring Mike Pence not to approve the vote count. They created fake slates of electors. And we have that famous perfect phone call with Donald Trump on the phone with Mark Meadows, his chief of staff, is telling people, find me 12,000 votes to
All I
change the
need,
election.
all I need, 11,780, just one more than we need. No, one more than we have. That's the quote. Just one more than
That's
we
going to
have.
bring that group down. But the second group is really weird. They made Rudy Giuliani, Rico Giuliani, made these really nasty and false accusations against women who were working in Atlanta at the vote count. And so what they did is they brought down a minister from the Chicago area to preach to her that she should confess her sin, that somehow she put in phony ballots.
Physically went to her house.
Yep. Now, he was in the car outside. She refused to talk to him. So they came up with another idea. He was a white guy. So they were going to bring down black people to talk to her.
Black surrogates.
They would, yeah. So they brought down this guy who was the head of Black Voices for Trump. And they put down a woman who really was a weirdo. She was the publicist for the convicted sex offender, R. Kelly, who then went to work for the Meshuggah, is the only word to describe it, Kanye West, whose wife left him because she couldn't put up with this anymore. And I don't have to name her, everybody knows who she is. She's one of the Kardashians.
Yeah.
Yes.
Kanye now known as Ye, right?
Yes.
Known as Ye. So what happens is they say, we'll protect you if you only tell the truth. And she says, nothing gives. I'm not lying for you. So that's the second court. And then the third group, a local Republican Party political hacks from Georgia. Now, these are really the idiots who decided that they would lend their name to these fake Electoral College slates.
So that's how you get the state forgery charges coming up.
Yeah.
Well,
I think I'd like to really get your view on this, that they included so many of these people because they hope they're going to flip them, because these people don't want to go to jail because they did something stupid, because they try to help Trump.
Bob, you got to take on the low hanging fruit.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Alan. Yeah, I think a lot of these people, they're going to try to flip because they stupidly put their signatures on the fake electoral slate and had the nerve to even send it into the National Archives, which by itself is committing a crime. And as far as the two women were concerned, all they did was their jobs. They were two poll workers just doing their jobs. And they had people coming down in their face to, plead with them to change their stories.
Yeah.
And so, of course, thank God they turned them away. And Rudy apparently said of late that, they didn't do anything.
Yeah, Rico Rudy.
Yeah.
Actually, under a deposition, confessed to the fact that, that was a lie. I made that up or something to that effect. That was not
the freedom of speech to lie.
Yeah, right. They didn't do that. And so guess what? We talked about this before. Those women have a suit against Rudy for maligning them and causing them such distress that they had to move from their homes, had to hide their identities. There was so much threat to their lives. They filed a civil suit against him. And I think that deposition and these new indictments going to work in the favor of them winning that separate suit, separate from Rico Rudy being charged under trying to suborn the Georgia state election for president. So
and these are just regular folk doing their job. They shouldn't have had their faces in the news. They shouldn't have been subject to any of this. So whatever comes out of the civil suit, I hope it's good and heavy.
I hope they get to him before everybody else gets to him, because he
exactly there won't be much left of him if these other suits pan out. The other charges.
I need for us to segue to the effect of this before we run out of time. because
Yes, we have about 7.5 minutes left. We're doing pretty well.
these guys like Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz, they're busy talking about the American people need to decide Trump's fate. Why are the courts trying to do this? This is weaponization of the Justice Department at every level, whatever their BS line is. And I know the Twitter sphere, X sphere, whatever they call in crazy Musk platform these days, lit up when Lindsey Graham came with that. So yeah, right. I wonder what happens when you let the American people decide. Oh, the guy who loses decides he's going to foment a coup and try to stay in office. So I think we've been down this road about letting the American people decide. So they've been hitting them left and right. But what, Alan, I need for you to kind of dissect really quick is we're here because Trump and his people realize the electoral system for electing a president is so screwed up, so bizarre with this electoral college nonsense that they had all kinds of loopholes that they were trying to push with their big lie because they could throw enough doubt into the system and muck up the system and then keep him in power. And then if the people rioted because he pulled a coup, they were just going to have him call out the troops using the Insurrection Act. This is all coming out in this indictment in Georgia. And so where do we go from here politically, Alan? Because this little stop that they passed saying the vice president only has ceremonial role doesn't get to the heart of fixing the Electoral College.
I wish I had an answer to this one.
Yes. And did you have one more category, Alan, of was there one more category of people charged that you didn't get to?
A fourth?
No, it was enough.
It's all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I think it was probably state forged charge or
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The problem with the Electoral College
is
that it was written to the United States Constitution for two reasons. One, because the wealthy planters and business people who wrote the Constitution did not trust ordinary voters and ordinary people, and they wanted to have a break on democracy. And the other was a way of ensuring that the slaveholding South would sign into the new country. So we have an antiquated system that is anti-democratic and pro-slavery. And it's become impossible to change because he gives extra power to small, underpopulated states, which so they can make demands. You know, even in the United States Senate, you have the same inequity that was written in. Wyoming has 2 senators and no people, and California with 55 million people has 2 senators. So there are some really undemocratic structures.
Right. And we have about 4.5 minutes, and I know we have one more important issue we wanted to get to.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. So let's segue to the fact that another big story, which we're not going to get into because we're going to do a climate show for real with Just Climate. The Maui fires, they got to investigate what went wrong, who did what caused what. Death toll is heading up to over 100 now, but that's climate related. The other major climate thing is Montana, right?
Yeah,
for those young people. And we need to hit that because that has a big legal significance globally.
Well, in Montana, there's a major victory for climate activists if it stands on appeal. But a judge ruled in a case that was brought by 16 teenage kids,
young people,
ranging age from 5 to 22. They brought a case charging that the failure of the state of Montana to regulate polluters,
fossil fuel industry and their loose permitting, yes,
was a violation of the Constitution, which charged that the state had a requirement to, quote, maintain and improve a clean and healthful environment in Montana for present and future generations. The case was brought in June, went to trial, and the judge, Kathy Seeley, a Montana judge,
they lost the initial run on this case, right?
Yeah.
A lower judge said you guys, sorry, but go home. And the group that was working with the young people said, no, we're not going home. Kids, are you ready to go to war? The kids said, yeah, we're ready to go to war. They went to the appellate court. Go ahead, pick up, Alan.
Well, what the thing in Montana, Montana, as you know, if you've seen in the movies, is cold and snowy winters. But warming there is nearly twice the global rate.
Ooh.
In Montana, on the Canadian border, there's Glacier National Park. And that has already warmed about 3 degrees Fahrenheit. If you go there, Glacier National Park does not have glaciers. They're disappearing, and the U.S. Geological Survey says they're going to be gone.
Mm-hmm.
So what these kids have said is that the environment that we were promised is being destroyed, and the Constitution of Montana says that you have to act. Now, the legislature is dominated by Republicans and fossil fuel industry, and they're going to look for ways to get around it.
The judges, the appellate judge's ruling. That, I mean, she just lit into the legislature.
Montana's emissions and climate change have been proven to be a substantial factor in causing climate impacts to Montana's environment and harm and injury.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the lead plaintiff is a young woman, about 20-something, named Ricky Held. She lives on a farm in southeastern Montana, and in August 2022 alone, there were 25 wildfires within 50 miles of her home. And in 2022, 2,000 wildfires in Montana. It's what's happened in California, it's what happened in Oregon, it's what happened in Hawaii. Climate change is drying out the forest. It's what happened in Canada and brought us all that smoke in New York. And they're igniting.
And we're going to discuss that in a media watch, which will focus on climate change, if not the next one coming up soon. But we only have about 20 seconds left.
Okay, so the judge sided with these young people and said, as a matter of fact, in a court. And so that's a precedent that other cases can now rely on. This has been Media Watch, folks. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony. Follow us on YouTube at Media Watch EVT.
And I'm their friend and guest, Alan Singer. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us, Dr. Singer. And folks, we'll catch you the next time. Stay safe.